Deb, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited for our conversation. And the first question I want to ask you, and you're not going to expect this because I pre-told you some questions I might ask you, and I don't even know if I'm going to ask those. But the first question that really caught my eye was when I was looking at your website and reading about your life mission and your motto. I love that you say life is not a rehearsal. That resonated with me so much. I say this to all of my friends, like, just go for it. Like, this is it. This is your one chance. Like, there's no do over to this. So I want to get your perspective on that motto and what you think about that.
Well, I perhaps first of all need to tell you why I named my coaching practice Not a
Yes.
Rehearsal. It was in part due to that adage, life is not a rehearsal. But secondly, because after all I'd been through those 25 years of abusive relationships, when I took myself out of that situation and started to put myself first and start to say, right, what is it I want? What am I looking for? I recognized that my lifelong ambition had been to become a professional actor. And at the ripe old age of 42, I got my equity card, which is the Actors Union, as I'm sure many of you know, and my Spotlight membership, which to me was confirmation that I was a professional actor. And I thought, I need to give a nod to one of my lifelong passions in what I'm doing, because this business is about me. It is based on my experience. My experiences to date have got me to where I am now. They inform my coaching practice, and I need to give a nod to that. And I'm sure you and many of your listeners know when it comes to naming a business, you sit for hours and days trying to decide what to call it. And it just came to me one morning in the shower, and I thought, yes, that's it. Because actually, with my experience as well, I'm testament to the adage that life is not a rehearsal.
Wow. I did not know about your acting experience and your passion in acting. I can see you as an actress. I don't know if you practice in acting now, but I can definitely see it.
Well, I haven't done anything recently, obviously, because of the global situation. But I do make a habit, a promise to myself that I will do some form of acting at least once per year, if nothing else. And it was one of those I had to decide whether I was prepared to go on tour continuously, which I had the opportunity to do, or be at home and give my son a stable home environment until he leaves school. And I chose the latter, realizing that I've got my equity card, I've got my Spotlight membership. Nobody can take that away from me now. So even if I don't do anything with it, I know I've done it. I've got that feather in the cap. But that said, I think last year I did a theatre production early in the year. The year before that, I did a website commercial. I have actually done a Facebook advertisement for somebody this year, and I'm waiting for that to be launched as well. So there are little projects out there which I do and I can do. But when my son has left school, then I'll be in a position to say, right now I can actively go and audition for things. And of course, running my own practice means I can balance when I'm working on my coaching practice and when I'm following my passion.
Yep, you have a lot more of a flexible schedule. What I
Exactly.
hear from you is you just wanted to prove it to yourself that you could do it. So it doesn't seem like you need to prove anything to anyone else. As soon as you got that accreditation and certificate and the Spotlight membership, you're like, I made it. Like, I'm done. I
Absolutely.
achieved. And that's all that mattered to you. And now if you dibble and dabble a little bit or if you go all in, you're happy either way.
Exactly. You're spot on there. I mean, we spend our lives with all of these limiting beliefs. And I was told in school that if I pursued my dream of being an actor, I was never going to get anywhere. And it's one of the things I look back at. I actually got offered a place at RADA,
Mm.
the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, and I didn't go
Why?
because everybody said acting was too difficult. I would never make it. My parents decided they couldn't afford to send me to London because I was living sort of well out of London at that stage. I didn't go. And my first husband had proposed to me and asked me to marry him. And I thought, I can't leave him for 3 years while I go to drama college. I mean, hindsight is a marvelous tool, but it was one of those things that, what if? I always wondered, what if?
Mm.
No regrets not going now because I've had an incredible life. It's got me to where I am. There are times where I think, what if? So getting my equity card, getting my Spotlight membership, that was just confirmation, if you like, that yes, I was good enough. And now, as you rightly say, if I pursue it in a couple of years' time, so
Doesn't matter.
be it. But if I don't, it doesn't matter because I'm doing so many things that I really love and enjoy. And I still get to do a bit of acting occasionally as well. So I've actually got a really good balance. And if it ain't broke, why fix it?
I know the all of those forks in a road, that's a movie in itself. I feel like you were
Hmm.
living and acting through a movie, whether to stay at home with your son, whether to pursue a career, whether to accept a marriage proposal. Your parents are putting there's roadblocks no matter
Yeah.
where you're looking. How old are you at this time? In your 20s?
Then I was 19.
Yep. I mean, I'm 28 and I still have forks in the road, but at
Mhm.
that age, the world is truly your oyster. It still is all the
Exactly.
time, but truly then you have no life experience to know what to
Yeah.
choose.
Exactly. Exactly.
So, which road did you go down?
Well, I married my boyfriend and he became my first husband. We got engaged at 19, married. I just turned 20 when we got married. And we had dated since I was 14. So at 19 years old, when your boyfriend proposes to you and you've been together for 5 years, that age, that's a lifetime.
You feel like you won.
Exactly. So, of course, I married him.
Mhm.
What I wasn't expecting was to get beaten up for the first time on our wedding night. And needless to say, that came as a bit of a shock.
Of course.
But I remember being shocked and then thinking to myself, oh, this is what they mean when they say, are you prepared for your wedding night?
Whoa.
Yeah. And I was a huge fan of period drama and I'd read all of the classics. So, of course, they say, oh, make sure you're prepared for your wedding night. And when, at that point, when that realization or thought hit me, it was as if the penny dropped and I thought, this is what they mean. And I recall that evening, he beat me up and said to me, you're mine now. I can do what I wish with you.
Oh my god.
And I was stunned. But the following morning, went down to breakfast and he made sure that he didn't beat me around the head
Mhm.
or anywhere where any bruises would be visible. So, of course, nobody knew I'd been beaten. And we went downstairs for breakfast the following morning. We were staying in a lovely hotel. And I looked around the breakfast room, and of course, there were lots of couples sat there. And many of them were older couples. And a lot of the time, as couples get older, they get settled into their routine. They don't always have those animated conversations over the breakfast table. And I looked around that room and I thought, oh my goodness, all of these women in here have been through this as well. That's why they're not talking. And I thought, well, that's obviously what marriage is. Maybe my mum went through this, but nobody's told me, my grandmother, my aunts. But I couldn't ask anybody. I didn't feel I could ask.
Mhm.
Felt it was one of those unwritten things that happened that you just didn't talk about. And it was only when I'd been beaten up a number of times then for the following 18 months that I got to a stage where I thought, this just isn't right. I have to leave. And I understand how abused women and men come to that, how they feel about leaving, because it is terrifying. And the most dangerous time for a victim of domestic abuse is
When you're
when
leaving.
they leave.
Yep. It's the most vulnerable time.
Exactly. And of course, fast forward a number of years, and I now know why. And I understand all of that with my psychology training and all the other training I've done. I understand that. But back at that point, I had been too scared to leave. I didn't know where I was going to go. Naively thought I was going to let my parents down by walking out of my first marriage. I used to be involved with my local church and I spoke to my minister, my vicar, and I said, look, this is what's happening and I'm going to leave him. And he said, well, I'll speak to the elders. And they came back and said, you can't leave him. You need to give your marriage a try. And I thought, hold on a minute. You're condoning this behavior. And it was some time after I actually did leave him that I got told I couldn't take communion in church anymore because I hadn't given my marriage enough of a try. And that was the day I walked out of the church and I've not been back since. Totally
Don't
respect
blame you.
everybody else's views on religion, but it's not for me. However, I digress. So the day I actually left him, we were moving some bedroom furniture around. And I happened to be at one end of a wardrobe, as you do when you're moving furniture. And we were at the top of the stairs. And he pushed the wardrobe towards me really, really hard so that I almost fell down the stairs.
Oh my God.
And at that point, I just let go of the wardrobe, ran down the stairs and ran straight out of the front door and kept on running until I got to the telephone box at the end of the road. Because in those days, we didn't have mobile phones. That's how long ago it was. And I telephoned my father, and he lived about 8 miles away from me. I have no idea how fast my father drove that day, but it felt like he arrived at my front door within about 10 minutes. And I left my husband. I took my personal belongings, a few personal effects, and my toiletries, and that was it, and left him.
You never looked
He had
back?
the sense to just disappear, knowing that I'd called my father. I'd gone back to the house and I phoned my father. He's on his way to get me. And he just disappeared with that.
It
He
was
was
it was
scared
either
of
gonna
my
be missing
father.
or dead, and he knew that.
Exactly, exactly. So that was that. And I haven't seen my first husband since the day I walked out on him. But it has
Deb, I
felt
love you. Good. I hope he never shows his face again.
well,
That's a little aggressive on my end, but, oh, this stuff makes me so mad.
funnily enough, it's actually my second husband, my second marriage, which was more difficult.
Oh, God. Well, let me ask you this. Are you married now?
No, but I have been with my partner for 8 years.
Oh, nice. And obviously you're a relationship coach, so I'm sure you're trying as much as possible to practice what you preach, but
Oh,
no one's
completely.
perfect.
And I think I perhaps learned more through this relationship than any of my other
Mm.
relationships.
Well, I mean, the whole mission of this podcast, you look at the title, Ebb and Glow. We can't have beautiful times in our life if we don't experience the bad.
Exactly.
No, and the nature of ebbing and flowing, yes, the times that are good, like, enjoy them as well because there's gonna be times that are, quote, unquote, "bad" as well,
Hmm.
and I find the universe works in mysterious ways, and I often believe it works for us, so even though and
Completely.
I my heart goes out to you going through those first and second marriages and all that abuse, it's like, you would not be able to be doing what you do today if you didn't experience that.
Oh,
Do you
completely.
agree?
I
Yeah.
mean, the knowledge and experience I gained through going through my own abusive relationships is so much more than anything I could get from a book.
You would
When
never have empathy for the people you work with.
exactly, exactly.
'Cause there's nothing worse than if you're going to a coach or a therapist and you're explaining your situation and they've never experienced anything like that,
Hmm.
cannot have empathy for someone or
No,
sympathy. You just as much as you wanna care for them, you just do not understand, you
exactly.
know?
And I found that myself on my own sort of counseling journey. I had lots of counseling as I was trying to work out what had happened, why had this happened to me. But trying to find a counselor or a coach who had been through something similar, who was prepared to be open about it,
Yes.
it was like looking for the proverbial needle in the haystack. And for me, it's why I'm so open about my journey, because I want my clients and people who are looking for somebody like me to understand I've been there. I know what that fear is like. I'm not going to sit there and say, why didn't you just leave? Or why don't you just leave? I'm not going to sit there and say, don't worry, it'll all be fine. Just go home again.
It's neither of those options.
I'm going to be honest. And when I talk to my clients, and not all of my clients have abusive relationships or have
Mhm.
been through abusive relationships, but I do get a lot of clients who have got that background. And I'm just honest with them. And I always say, to them, it is your choice ultimately. Yeah, I'm not going to force you to stay. I'm not going to force you to go. But you need to make a decision and you need to work out a strategy to move forward. And once you've got that, then you can make a decision as to what you want your future to be like and make it with some clarity. So I work with them through a lot of that decision making process, obviously, work with them through their fears and concerns, and sometimes some of the logistics as well and the practical aspects of it.
That's the hard
And
part.
it exactly. And there are an incredible number of charities and organizations out there who support women in abusive relationships. But so many of them, again, are set up by people who want to help that haven't been through the situation themselves.
Yes.
And if I can talk to somebody and just get them to a point where they say, I'm going to ring the charity. And I don't know what the US or the Canadian charities are,
Mhm.
I'm afraid. So I'll just say the charity and keep it
Mhm.
generic. But if I can get them to a point where they say, I'm going to make that call, I know that I've done a really good job with them. And then the charity can take over, provide them with the refuge they need if they need housing, provide them, signpost them to the other places that I'm not aware of, where they can perhaps get some funds, look after children, all of that sort of thing. So that's one part of what I do. But the other part is working with survivors of domestic abuse who
Mhm.
have left, who have started to live their own lives, but are fearful of entering other relationships. And it's giving them the confidence
Mhm.
to go out there and know that they're not going to make those same mistakes again. And again, I work through a 12-week program with them to help them build that confidence, to help them recognize the patterns, how they can break those patterns. And we do a lot of work to get them to a point where they feel ready to go into another relationship. And more to the point, feel strong enough to say, this relationship isn't working for me.
Right.
I want better. I deserve better.
Mhm.
Because a lot of survivors of domestic abuse, and I'm certainly one of them, you go into your next relationship feeling grateful that the person you're with doesn't beat you, for example. And
And you're
I
missing
joke,
all
I've
the
had
other red flags?
exactly, I've had 3 abusive relationships. My first husband was physically and sexually abusive. My second husband was psychologically abusive. And there are times with him where I would say, why have you got to say such horrible things to me? Why are you doing this to me? Why are you treating me like this? And he would turn around to me and say, you should be grateful I don't beat you like your first husband did.
Yikes. Wow.
And I would agree with him.
That's shocking.
So, yeah. And from there, I then
Very
ended up,
manipulative.
completely manipulative. And that's the
That
thing with
leads to the
psychological
psychological
abuse,
abuse. Yeah,
coercive
yeah.
control. Exactly. So from there, I then ended up in a third relationship. It wasn't a marriage, but it was a long-term relationship that was financially abusive. So I tend to joke, I've got the hat trick of abusive relationships, but each one got progressively better. It improved each
Better in
time.
what way?
Then I wasn't getting beaten up physically. However, the second one, the mental scars
Will be with you for the rest of
taken
your life.
significantly longer to heal than any of the physical scars I had from my first husband.
Physical
And
scars heal. Financial
exactly,
scars, you can get more money, but psychological scars,
absolutely,
those are hard to get rid of.
exactly. And of course, it's the most difficult because people can't see it. People don't believe it. They believe that you're mad. I don't know how long I spent believing that I was mad, and having the authorities that should help me telling me that I was far from being a victim of abuse.
Oh my god.
I stood in a courtroom and was told by the judge that I couldn't possibly be a victim of abuse because I
There
was
was
a
nothing to
confident and
show.
eloquent witness.
Times have changed, thankfully, a little bit, a very slight amount. Oh my god. What ages are you going through this? Because I feel like my listeners are probably in those ages, and maybe their experiences aren't as drastic as yours, but you see emotional and psychological and sometimes physical abuse in very tiny ways that you're like, Is that a red flag? Was that wrong?"
Mhm. Mhm.
And you can't put, like, a name to it, you know? So I'm
Exactly.
assuming, yeah, you're kind of in your late teens to mid-30s,
Well,
40s?
my first marriage, we got married at 20. By the time I was 22, I'd left him. I was divorced by 24. So my late 20s, I moved around. I had a number of sort of relationships, flings really, I suppose, but nothing too serious. But I enjoyed my late 20s, let's say. Then I met my second husband. When was I? Just before I was 30.
Mhm. Did you have your son with this husband or your 3rd husband?
My
Your
second husband.
partner. Okay, okay.
A second husband. So I met him just before I was 30 and had my son when I was 33.
Mhm.
And I left him when I was 36.
You have a 3-year-old.
I had a toddler. Had a 3-year-old when I left his dad, yes. And that was so tough. So, so tough. And then my third abusive relationship, I think I was 39 going into that, and we were together until I was 42.
Like we've talked about your bio, you have a lifetime of experiences
Exactly.
that help
Exactly.
you help a lot of other people in the world now.
Mhm.
I want to jump into the reasons why we chatted at first. You said you had a previous business failure about 10 years ago,
Mhm.
which inevitably led you into bankruptcy and then a stint as a sex worker.
Mhm.
if you want to talk about how you found yourself working in the sex industry, maybe talk a little bit about the bankruptcy and whatnot. And as you mentioned, this was all happening while you had a son. You have a
Yeah.
kid, you have a dependent
Hmm.
now. So your decision making, you're deciding for two people now, not just one. So
Okay.
if you want to give us a little history about that.
Absolutely. Well, when I was married to my son's father, I'd set up a business. My son was 3 months old when I set up a business. I was one of the UK's first virtual assistants.
Cool.
And yeah, it was great that the business grew very, very rapidly. And my husband had lost his job around that time. I decided that it was best for me to go out to work and he would be a house husband. Hindsight's a
Wow, that's a
marvelous tool.
dream.
Yeah, yeah. Hindsight's a marvelous tool.
Yes.
And when I look back, you could see all of the dots. This thing that Steve Jobs says, looking back, you can see the dots looking back. You can't see them looking forward.
Hmm.
And I've written about this story in my book as well, Whatever It Takes, Living with, Leaving and Surviving Psychological Abuse. But I'd been working. It wasn't working for me. I didn't want to be one of those mums that left their child in childcare or at home while I went out to work full time. And the one day I just walked out. I walked out of my job, came home, and my husband said, "What are you doing home?" I said, "I've quit. I'm not going back." And he said, "Well, what are you going to do?" I said, "I don't know. I'm going to get on the phone and I'm going to ring everybody that knows me and see if they know somebody who might know somebody who might know somebody that needs some typing done." And that's
You're a
how my business
hustler.
started. I said, I'm not going back into the workplace.
Hmm.
So my business started with the intention of me being part-time business owner, part-time mum. I wanted it to be a lifestyle business. It grew so rapidly because I was the only breadwinner as well. So I had to make sure the mortgage was paid, the bills were paid, there was food on the table. I had a new baby to look after.
So no
And
stress at all. Nothing to
no,
worry about.
no stress, no pressure. And of course, I wasn't turning down work because I just didn't know how this thing was going to work. And as it turned out, I did really well. Within an 18-month period, the business grew from nothing to 250,000 turnover, but cash flow was pretty dire because I'd had to take on a lot of staff very, very early on to help me deal with all the workload. And my husband decided that as well as being the husband, he was going to help me in the business. So he then became on my payroll as well.
Okay.
As the business grew and my team grew to 10 staff, I was out of the office more and more, obviously promoting the business, doing the sales, doing the networking. And he decided he would be the office manager. He called himself the operations director, although he wasn't technically a director.
Mhm.
And the business started going through a lot of trouble. And I didn't understand why. I thought, this is crazy. I was looking at the books and I was looking at the sort of forward order book. I said, what is going on? And I found out again after the event that when I was out of the office, my ex-husband was sabotaging the business from within. I would have a
How?
weekly team meeting and I would say to them, right, this is the marketing that we're focusing on this week. This is what we're looking at. This is the campaign that we're running. These are the clients we need to serve. These are our potential clients. So everybody knew exactly what was going on in the business. And when I was out, he would turn around to the team and say, ignore everything that Deb has said. She has no idea what she's talking about. This is what we're doing. And of course, because he was on the ground, and he's quite an intimidating man, he's 6'4", and he was my kickboxing instructor.
Mhm.
So not a small man. And he used his height to intimidate people. He did it a lot. He tried it with
Oh
me very
God.
often. And he didn't need to say much. He didn't need to raise his voice. He just needed to stand there,
Mhm.
very tall, using his height. So he would intimidate the team into doing what he said pretty much without verbally intimidating them. So he was manipulating my team as well as me. I mean, I hadn't realized that's what was going on.
Which in turn leads your team having no respect for you and also so much confusion. They never feel like they're doing anything right in the job
Hmm.
because they're pissing someone off and pleasing someone else. And even though they probably agree with you, they're like, I'm kind of afraid of him. That toxic culture that breeds there. My God.
Hmm. So, and of course, that confusion was spilling over into potential clients who said, oh, no, we've gone elsewhere because we're not quite sure what it is you're offering anymore. He was very uncomfortable with the target market that I was working in. And so he decided he was going to launch another part of the business. without any consultation with me. And he was going out marketing that under the
You're
same name.
kidding.
No, you can't make this stuff up. You really can't make it up. So that was what was going on.
The
So
fragile ego in this man.
yeah, oh, completely.
Oh my God.
So really, it's no surprise that the business became insolvent, and it became insolvent on New Year's Eve 2008. And I only found out when I'd logged into the bank account to pay my team, and I always paid them on the last day of the year. And I'd given them the option that year. I said, do you want to be paid before Christmas, or do you want to wait until New Year's Eve, the last day of the month as usual? No, wait until the last day of the month, Deb, so we don't have a really long January, which I thought was quite sensible. So I logged into my bank account New Year's Eve to pay them, and there wasn't any money in the account. I couldn't pay my team. And there were a number of factors around that, but my 3 largest clients hadn't paid me on time. And when I contacted them, they said, well, we wanted it in our bank account over Christmas, not yours, because we're not sure how things are going. And that was just at the start of the recession of 2008,
I was
2009.
going to say.
So, and I don't like to blame that at all. I hold myself responsible. I should have made those phone calls. I should have had a closer eye on the business. But I trusted my husband. Lots of things I would have done differently if I'd had my time over again. So I take responsibility for taking my eye off the ball. But I had to ring my team on New Year's Eve and make them redundant with immediate effect and no pay. And so it really is one of the worst things I've ever had to do, because I was hurting other people. And
Yep.
I'm not somebody
And hurting
who
their
hurts other
families. It's that time of the
Yeah.
year. It's going to New Year. Ugh.
Exactly.
Especially because
So
you're paying for work already done.
that's it. That's it.
So not paying
And
for that,
from
yeah.
there, I had to close the business. I went through bankruptcy. And when I asked my husband to just put his arms around me and tell me everything was going to be okay, he stood with his back against the wall and his arms by his side. And he said, I can't, because I don't know that it will. And in that moment, I knew my second marriage was over. And he then laid into me verbally, telling me, I don't know what you think you were doing. Who on earth thought you could run a business? You have no idea what you're doing. You're just stupid. I knew this was going to happen. Nobody likes you anyway. Everybody's been laughing about you behind your back. Who do you think you are? All those sorts of things. At this moment where I desperately needed support, and all he could do was fire arrows at me. You talk about a knife in the back. At that point, I thought, I can't deal with this now. I've got to do what I need to do for my business. I had to speak to all of my clients, let them know what was going on.
You're
Had to see
going
if
tail between your legs. You're so embarrassed.
I had to
God.
see if I could find an alternative virtual assistant for my clients who expected high standards and expected it off me. And because it was New Year's Eve, there weren't a lot of people out there that I could actually talk to for advice.
Yeah,
Again,
no one's back in the
hindsight.
office probably for another week.
Exactly. I would do things a lot differently now, as I said, but that was that. And I realized my second marriage was over. And the weeks that followed got progressively worse. And of course, I was then uncovering things that he had said, he had done,
It's a
what had
domino effect.
happened.
You're just like, how bad is this?
Yeah.
It's
And
bad.
it got to one day, it was a Saturday morning, and it was shortly after his 40th birthday, actually. I'd said to him on his 40th, I said, look, we can't have a big party, but I've got enough money there that we can invite people over for dinner. I could cook a really nice meal for your 40th. And we had quite a big house, a really big dining room, and I was able to invite 20 people for dinner, and I cooked for them all.
Wait now. Why are you celebrating this guy?
Because it was his birthday. It was his 40th birthday.
Who cares?
And
This guy's an asshole.
at that point, I was still hoping that somehow or other we could resurrect this marriage, because I didn't know I was in an abusive relationship at that point. I had a 3-year-old son. He had been my 6th pregnancy. And I really didn't want to have a second divorce under my belt. And I certainly didn't want my son to grow up outside of a sort of firm family unit. So I was prepared to do anything to keep that marriage going. And I thought, this is just a phase. We'll deal with all of this stress. We'll have something to look forward to. We'll have his birthday. And that wasn't good enough. Everything I did that evening wasn't good enough, to the point where he was actually telling me that in front of everybody else. I received a telephone call as I was preparing dinner that afternoon, offering me a job from one of my former clients. And it was a very good job. It was a partnership in their business. And all my husband could say to me was, well, he's obviously only offered you that because you're sleeping with him. My jaw hit the floor. And he said this around the dining table.
Oh my
And everybody
God.
looked at me and I said, what are you talking about? I'm not
When do I have
somebody
time
that
to sleep with
sleeps
someone
with their
else? I'm too
clients.
busy cleaning up your
Exactly.
shit.
Exactly. So I thought, right, okay, if that's what you think about me. But again, I thought, I'm not making a scene this evening. We're having a lovely evening.
Ugh, you're
So
such
I
a
ended up
person.
taking that job. Yeah, I know. But I
You're a
ended
better
up
person than I am, Deb. That's for sure.
taking the job. 3 months later, I got made redundant. Irony of
Oh.
ironies, because I refused to sleep with the boss. So,
Wait,
yeah,
what?
yeah. So my ex-husband had some
I'm
insight
sorry
there,
to
which I didn't
laugh.
have.
That was the last thing I
I
would
know,
thought I was gonna hear.
I know.
The
So,
that is the definition of irony.
mhm,
Oh my
exactly.
god. Your
So, and it,
your ex-husband manifested that shit.
didn't he just? Well, no, he didn't, because I wasn't sleeping with him, and I didn't
Yes.
sleep with that boss. But not that I've slept with any bosses, however. But it was just one of those. I thought, you can't make this stuff up. I talk in my book about my life becoming a very bad soap opera.
Well,
But
I
from
said
there,
earlier, I feel like you were acting the whole time.
yeah,
You're making
yeah.
a movie.
From there, I got offered another job. I was made redundant because the company was restructuring 3 months later. And then I went into another job that I was also made redundant from because of restructuring.
I'm sure you're sitting here being like, "Universe, like, what are you trying to tell me?" Like,
Yeah. And I got to the point where I was bankrupt by this point. I'd gone through bankruptcy. I was back living with my parents. I'd left my ex-husband the day that my son had come to me at 3 years old and said, "Don't cry, mummy, I'll look after you." And I thought,
sweet little
no 3-year-old should say
should
that
say
to their
that.
mum. I'm not doing this to him. I need to go. And I had no idea where I was going to go. So again, I took my clothes, my toiletries, a few personal effects, said, I'll come back to get my son when I'm sorted, because I didn't want to drag a toddler around sofas, spare rooms, floors, wherever it might be, because he wasn't at risk with his dad. There was no danger to him. In fact, his father doted on him ridiculously. It,
One good quality.
oh, completely. And I ended up back at my parents' when I was 38 years old, moving into their spare room. And I went back to get my son. And his dad said to me, he's going to live with you over my dead body. And then started an absolute character assassination on me with all of the authorities, courts. And I got to a point where I thought, I can't take this anymore. So I was going through that in the background with my ex-husband. My parents had very, very generously been guarantors for me. I'd managed to get myself a flat. When I had one of the jobs that I lost, I'd been able to rent an apartment, which my parents had put down guarantor monies for. And they said, look, we're going to guarantee it because we know you can afford it. You've got this good job, but please don't call on it because that's our pension wiped out. And I got to the point where this third redundancy, it was November 2010. Christmas was looming. I thought, I have no idea what I'm going to buy my son for Christmas. I can't afford to buy him anything. I couldn't afford to meet my rent. I was struggling to buy food. And I thought, I can't do this. I cannot keep fighting anymore. So I took my last £30, which I think is probably about 60 Canadian dollars,
Yeah.
and went out and bought what I needed for my next project. And that project was to take my own life. And I sat down one evening, it was a Friday evening in November 2010. And I'd had a bottle of wine by that point. I was fortifying myself up ready for it. And I sat at my desk and I pushed out the blister packs of pills, paracetamol, whatever pills I could get my hand on, things that I'd had in the sort of store cupboard or the first aid kit at home. Lots of, I don't know what was there altogether, but I probably had about 60 pills all told. And I bought a bottle of vodka for that particular project. And I opened the vodka, picked up a pile of pills, put them into my mouth, tipped the vodka back into my mouth. And as I looked up, I saw a photograph of my son on my bookcase. And I knew I couldn't do it. And I spat the pills out, put the vodka down. And I thought, I can't have him growing up to be 14 years old and believing mummy killed herself because she didn't love him or didn't want him, which was the messaging his father was giving him at that age.
Wow.
When he was little, mummy left you because she didn't want you anymore. She doesn't love you. And that was far from the truth. I left him because I didn't want him to be in a toxic environment.
Of course.
And if I'd known then what I know now, what I hadn't realized at that time was in leaving my son, in the eyes of the law in the UK at that time, I had voluntarily given up my right to be his primary carer. So hence the 10-year legal battle. But obviously that night, I didn't take my own life. And I sat in front of my computer and I thought, well, I've only got one thing left to give now. And that's this. That's my body. And at that point, I had been self-medicating quite heavily for a number of months with alcohol. I'd been going out having one-night stands, putting myself in very dangerous situations. I was absolutely on a massive self-destructive path. So
Mhm.
it's no surprise really that, I ended up facing bankruptcy for the second time. And I thought, well, you're prepared to give it away. Wonder what would happen if you actually start selling it. And I created I'm not going to share any of the websites because I don't think it's appropriate, but there is a website out there, which is kind of the sex industry equivalent of Facebook. If you like, you have a profile, you offer your services. So on Facebook, you get a business page. You have all of those sorts of things on this website. So I created my profile, I put it out there and I thought, I'm really scared about doing this, but
It's
if
your last
people want
resort.
to buy a piece of me, they're going to have to pay through the nose for it.
Mm.
So I charged double what any of my nearest competitors were charging.
It's a great
Within
marketing,
Yeah,
plan.
but that's what I had done with my previous business, with the virtual PA business.
Mhm.
I'd gone out there, looked at what my competitor's skill set was, recognized my own skill set because I'd been a corporate PA at a senior level much of my career up until that point. So I thought, actually, I know I can offer a better service than that. So I doubled my rates in the virtual PA
And
business.
when you
So I
double
thought,
your
no, I'm
rate,
going to.
that gives an impression of, "I have better services." Even if you don't, it's perception is everything.
Exactly. And that's what I did when I became an independent escort. And of course, speaking the way I speak, that also pushed me up into the levels of high
You
class
bet.
escort.
It's a fetish in
So
itself.
exactly. So I thought, right, I'm going to capitalize on this. And I went into it with two objectives. One was to earn enough money to pay my rent in advance for a year, which I did. And the other was to put the same amount aside in an account so that I always had an emergency fund.
Of course.
And I managed to do that.
Sex
And
sells.
oh, it does completely. What I didn't expect to get from that experience was the springboard to what I now do, was the
Yeah.
interest in the human psyche, particularly the male psyche. And when I look back, I must have been a pretty rubbish escort because
I
seriously,
love that you say that you think you're the worst sex worker ever.
I must have been because my clients would come and see me and you make conversation. We've all seen Pretty Woman. We've all seen various films with
Mhm.
high class hookers in.
Foreplay, as they call it.
Exactly. So you'd make conversation and I'd say things, so, oh, why did you choose to see me then? And why is it that you decide to use the sex industry? Are you in a relationship? And majority of them were married. Well,
You're doing the
why aren't
full
you having
interview.
conversations with your wife?
Mhm.
So I'd end up talking to them about what was going on in their life and why they were using the sex industry, why they weren't having an affair, and all of those sorts of things. There's a lot less stigma having an affair than there is the sex industry. And I started to get really curious about why people use the sex industry and also why people worked in the sex industry because I was there through choice. And I met numerous other escorts through it. Obviously, there's networks in every industry,
Of course.
and they were there through choice.
Hmm. Because
The
initially,
sex.
did you think people kinda got forced into this industry?
Oh, yeah. My
You didn't realize there was so much choice in it and so much power almost.
exactly. And my view of the industry at that point was that anybody that works in the industry are desperate, no matter what they say. Now, yes, I know at that point I was desperate entering the industry. What I didn't expect to get from it was the education, and I don't mean the sex education. I mean the education about humankind, mankind.
Relationships.
Exactly. And I realized early on that the sex was the least important part of any transaction.
Hmm.
It literally, if people booked me for an hour, the sex maybe lasted for 10 minutes.
Wow.
The rest of the time, it was about conversation. It was connection. It was communication. Clients just wanting to get things off their chest. And realizing that, I thought, I want to find out more about this. I've always been a curious person. I like to find out what's going on. I like to know what makes people tick. And I always joked when I was a PA, I love being a PA because it's the one role in a company that gets to find out everything that's going on.
Yes.
So I'm ostensibly nosy is what it boils down to. So whilst I was working in that industry, I had a classic pretty woman moment where one of my clients fell in love with me. I fell in love with him. So having achieved the objectives I'd set out to achieve, I then stopped working in the industry, which I'm forever grateful to him for, because I was at the stage, I was at crossroads. I was 40 years old. I could continue to work in the industry and make some serious money. The offers I was getting, I could have made some serious money, but it would have meant going more down a porn route, moving across to the States to really get involved. I could have earned serious money at it, but it also meant I was going to have to turn my back on my family, my friends, and create a completely new life, a
Yep.
new name, a new persona. And I wasn't prepared to do that.
It's hard to live
I
that
wasn't
double
prepared
life.
to do that to my son.
Yeah.
You know, that duplicitousness is the one thing I always had a problem with in the sex industry, because I'm always just me. And it was the biggest acting role of my life. Each
I was
time I had a
just gonna
client,
say,
if they gave out Oscars for it, I'd be up there.
it's a different persona. A lot of people have a
Oh,
different name in this
completely.
industry, and yeah, it's acting.
Completely. I had a different name, persona. I became more of a caricature of myself. I became the ballsy woman that I really wanted to be.
Mm.
So I just ramped it up. And there are times now, if I'm lacking in confidence for something, I say, right, okay, what would she do? And I don't share my former working name with anybody, because I dare say if people searched it online, they'd find things, but say, what would she do? Right. And it's surprising what just happens. It's the neural pathways, all the receptors start sparking, the neurons start flying around. And it really does help me sometimes to get that confidence, because I don't know where the confidence came from to see that first client. I don't know. Well, it wasn't confidence. It was survival mode.
Desperation,
It was
yeah.
about, I've got to do this for my son.
Yeah.
This is about my son. It's not about
If it was
anybody or
just for
anything
you, do
else.
you think you would have went through with it?
No, I would
Yeah,
have taken my life. I wouldn't be sat here now. It's as simple as that.
exactly.
So, and my son doesn't know half of this. He
How
really
old's your
doesn't
son
know.
now?
He's 16 now.
He'll find out eventually. You have a book out.
Oh, I know he will. He will,
Yes.
and it's actually great. Mentioned earlier there'd been a 10-year legal battle, and he's now been living with me for 4 years. So I
Nice.
finally got my son here just before his 13th birthday, and it's been incredible. And nowadays, that's why I said earlier, I chose to put my son's stability first, because I missed out so much on his childhood. I have him here, and to share these really, really important teenage years with him. He's just done his GCSEs here in the UK, and he's about to go to drama college, which is entirely his choice. His father is dead set against it, but he said, no, this is what I want to do, and I'm going to do it. And he came out as gay when he was 14 years old. And he said to me, oh, Mum, he said, I couldn't be myself if I was with my dad. I'm so glad I'm here. He's had so many opportunities living with me and with my partner that it's just wonderful. And I'm so, so grateful that I carried on fighting. But, it was difficult. And I had the pretty woman moment when I was working in the sex industry, met a client. I gave up the industry to be with that client, who I have to say I didn't need to work. He was a banker, and we lived in a beautiful 5-bedroom farmhouse
Wow.
in the countryside. I really didn't need to work. And he would give me a monthly allowance. And he said, you can spend it on anything you like. I don't need to know what you're spending it on, but I do need you to account for every penny,
Okay.
which meant I couldn't put any money aside to
Get you out of any potential
get me
situation.
out of anything, because the money that I had put aside from the sex industry, I had locked it away so I couldn't touch it.
Mhm.
And I knew early on in the relationship with that client that it wasn't a healthy relationship. It was very suffocating. He didn't trust
Trolling
me.
again?
Exactly. So his way of controlling me was to give me that monthly allowance,
Yeah,
but to make sure I couldn't save any money. I couldn't put it aside. And
such a
whilst
weird
they just,
situation. It's almost like it's something to do with, like, a tax write-off, or I don't.
yeah, it was really weird. And yet, how many women say, "Oh, I would love to be a kept woman." So many women you speak to dream of being in
Mhm.
this relationship where they are the kept woman. And It was
It didn't
very,
feel
very
right for you.
strange. It wasn't right for me. As I say, it was suffocating. He would come everywhere I went. He would come too. So if I was meeting girlfriends for a drink, he would come. I decided I was going to go and do some amateur drama, amateur dramatics, which I'd done for much of my life. And I thought, I'm going to go and get back into amateur dramatics because my second husband hadn't been at all supportive of me doing that anyway. I thought, I just need something that's me. But he had to come with me and he had to go on the stage with me, despite never having been on stage, never being interested in it. So it was
So
really,
these are red flags while they're happening because you've already been through this kind of
yeah,
twice.
yeah.
Okay. But
But
you're still just going through the motions.
well, I had no choice because I couldn't get out.
Right. Again.
I couldn't get out of the relationship. And one day I got cast in a touring production, which is the
Mhm.
production that gave me my equity card. I'd seen it advertised. I thought, I'm going to apply for that. I'm going to go and audition. I got an audition, got the part because I thought, well, I'm not doing anything else. Now is the time. Now is the opportunity to pursue my lifelong ambition. We'll see what happens. I got cast in the play. I became the poster girl, and it was the most unglamorous poster girl you've ever seen. I was a really sort of scary hospital nurse with a big
Well,
frown and a big pout, but that's beside the point. I was the poster girl. And my partner, who I'm now with, saw the poster on the wall of his local theatre and recognized my face because in between my husband's number one and two, he and I had dated for a year.
you're kidding. I love
No.
your life. All of these
And
mixes and matches.
I know, it's just how the universe works, hey? We had lost contact. He'd gone off to university as a mature student. I'd gone to live and work in London. Again, we didn't have mobile phones then. So
Mhm.
if we wanted to ring each other, we would have to make a date to have a phone call. And then he
Right.
was having to queue at the phone booth in halls. I was having to go to the phone box at the end of the road.
There's such a romantic notion about that, though.
I know.
Now we have direct access to anyone we want at all times.
Exactly.
Takes away the
Exactly.
romance.
So it just over time, it fizzled out. We'd invariably arranged a call on a Friday night, and he would end up saying, oh, I've got to go. I've got to go. I'm going out with my flatmates. I'd have arranged to go out with friends, and it just fizzled out. There was no big deal, but he was always the love of my life.
Yeah?
And
You knew it at the time too?
oh, completely. And he was the one that got away. So I knew that going into my second marriage. But I thought, well, time and place, better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all, was the adage that kept going through my mind. So when I got cast in this play and he recognized my face on the poster, and this is another twist, he spoke to the box office manager in the theatre and said, is that Debbie Higgins, which had been my maiden name, and that's the name
Right.
he'd known me as. And the box office manager said, do you know what? I think you're right. She used to be in a children's theatre group with my two daughters when she was younger. I'll make some inquiries. I mean,
You're
how?
not living in a small place either.
No, exactly. And I was living, the theatre I was living in Wales at the time. The theatre was in England, a
Mhm.
good sort of, I don't know, 45 miles away. And he, at that point, he'd been all over the world. I'd been to London. I'd been married. All sorts of things had gone on just to bring us back to collide in this place. And obviously it was me. So my partner sent me a message on Facebook. He found me on Facebook, knowing that it was me, messaged me and just said, hi, it's me. Do you remember me?
Oh,
I
my
think I'm coming
heart.
to see you in a play. So we had a chat, and it was the general chat. How is the family? How's everybody? What have you been up to? And it was the sort of conversation you would have with, say, an old school friend who you stumble across on Facebook and
Yeah.
haven't spoken to for years and
There's no,
years.
like, romance right away. It
Oh,
was
it's
just a general
absolutely
chat.
nothing. And I
Yeah.
was at that point, I thought, yes, you might be the love of my life. You might have been the one that got away, but I'm not telling you that yet. I
Yes.
want to know what the situation is because at that stage, I'd been through enough.
Yeah.
And I thought, I'm not prepared to risk what I've got. Although I wasn't happy, I had the lifestyle, I had some level of security. I'm not prepared to risk all that.
You're in
So
a
I was very
5-bedroom beautiful
cagey.
farmhouse. Can buy
Mm,
whatever you want.
exactly. I was very cagey in my conversations with him. What I didn't account for was that the banker that I was living with was actually checking all of my social media and my phones.
How
And he read the messages and went ballistic, as you might imagine. And this was a Saturday morning where he confronted me in our farmhouse kitchen. And my son was with us that weekend. And I said, look, I'll tell you everything you want to know. There's absolutely nothing to worry about. But I'm not having that conversation with you now whilst my son is here. When he's gone home to his dad's, we'll sit down and have that conversation.
Mhm.
We are having this conversation now.
Oh, God.
I said, no, we are not. We will have
Mhm.
this conversation when my son is at home. Besides which, it's my opening night tonight.
He has
So,
no awareness of your life.
no.
Everything is on his terms.
Hmm.
Oh my goodness.
So he said, no, you're not going. I am going. It's opening night. And I'm happy to answer any questions you have and talk about this when my son has gone back to his dad's tomorrow evening. And I was as calm as that because there was nothing in it.
You have nothing to hide. You just
No,
read it all.
exactly. And at that point, he seized my car keys from the side in the kitchen, put them in his pocket, manhandled me out of the front door, and I was in my pajamas, and locked me outside the house. My son was upstairs in his bedroom playing. And I don't know if your listeners have ever been separated from their child. Having been through all I had been through with my son, and he still wasn't living with me at that stage, so I was only seeing him at weekends, but nobody separates me from my son. That partner saw a side of me that I don't think anybody has ever seen. I stood in our front garden and I screamed and I screamed and I screamed. And he opened the front door. Stop screaming. All the neighbors will come running. I said, I am going to scream until you let me back in, until you let me see my son. You are not separating me from my son. So he let me back in. But he also had confiscated my mobile phone. So then locked me in my son's bedroom with my son. What he hadn't realized, and I'd only discovered, I think, a night or so earlier, my son's father had given him a mobile phone because I was dead set against him having a mobile phone. I think he was about 6 at the time. I thought, no, a 6-year-old doesn't need a mobile phone, but his dad had given him one and it was in his bag in his bedroom.
Mm. The
So,
one good thing this man has done.
exactly. And I yelled through the door to my partner, I said, you don't let me out, I am calling the police because now this is imprisonment, this is kidnapping. And really, as a banker, do you really want that on your record? You can't call the police. I've got your mobile phone. I said, trust me, I can call the police. I have a phone in here with me. To which point the door flew open. He said, give me that phone. I said, no, it's Bailey's. And if you take this phone, you need to reckon with his father. And he wouldn't speak to his father. He was scared of his dad. At that point, he gave me back my phone and said, right, I'll give you your phone then you won't say I've kidnapped you. It's okay. And I thought, this is crazy. What can I do? I'd never seen him like that. He scared me. And I thought, there's only one person that I can contact. And I knew that Floss, my partner, who was the person that recognized my face, I knew he was a social worker. And I thought, I know he will be used to dealing with situations like this. It wasn't really how I wanted our first meeting to go. I didn't want him to think, oh God, she's one of my clients, but I didn't know who else to call. I didn't want to call my parents because they were elderly. I didn't
They've
want
been through so
to call.
much.
Exactly. They'd been through a lot and they've been so supportive of me, but it wasn't fair to drag them into that. I didn't want to call my son's father because we had a very acrimonious relationship and all he would have done was make matters worse. I just don't know who to call.
You don't want to give him reasons to fight more country
Exactly.
battles.
Exactly. He was already doing his worst with all of the different authorities as it was. I was an unfit mother. I was this, I was that.
Don't give him any more reasons.
Exactly. So I thought, there's only one person to call. So I just phoned and I said, look, this is the situation. This is what's happened. Can you help? Stay where you are. I'm coming to get you. So I then relayed that this is what was going to happen, at which point the partner I was living with, because this is where it gets very confusing, he said, if you want to be with him, I'm taking you there. So then he bundled me and my son into his car and started speeding down narrow country lanes to get to the motorway. I said, this can't be happening. This is now dangerous. Phoned Floss again. And he said, I'm on my way. Tell him to turn around, take you home because yours and Bailey's safety is paramount. And if anything should happen to you, he will be in an awful lot of trouble. As a banker, he really didn't want that because that would have been all over the press as well. So he really knew which buttons to press. Thankfully, we were turned around. We were bundled back into the house again. And I can remember it felt like a lifetime of waiting until Floss walked down the garden path
And let me remind the audience, this is your opening night. Like, you
Yeah.
got this is a lot of stress problem happening for your opening night. Like,
Yeah, yeah. All this was happening. I'd forgotten that. Yes, it was.
oh my
Um,
God.
and in fairness, he arrived. He walked down the garden path, turned around to my partner. He said, "Look, I know you want to punch me, and you're welcome to punch me. But first of all, we've got a little boy in there that we need to get to safety. I'm taking him and Deb to her parents. Then I'll come back, and then you can punch me." Now he did go back. He had a conversation. Thankfully, no punches were thrown because I don't know how my former partner would have fared because Floss was a former Royal Marine. So he could look after himself as well.
Your husband at the time met his match.
He did indeed. It wasn't my proudest moment, but the universe conspires in mysterious ways to bring you into the path of the people you're meant to be with. We've now been together for 8 years,
Wow.
and each year gets better and better. But the biggest lesson I had to learn was how to be loved unconditionally. And
Mm,
after all I have been through,
you finally felt it.
all of the studying I've done, the sex industry was my springboard to study psychology. The hardest, toughest lesson I had to learn was how to be loved unconditionally because every other relationship I'd been in, there'd been conditions attached. And believe you me, I did my best to try and screw it up. I was on a self-sabotage path for a very long time until he turned around to me one day. He said, "You can throw whatever you like at me, Deb," metaphorically. He said, "I'm not going anywhere. If anybody ends this relationship, it's going to be you." And at that point, I sat there and I thought, okay, I guess I've got no choice now then.
Mm. You just gotta start
And
opening your heart
when
and accept it.
that's it. And that's one of the lessons I share when I'm working with my clients. And I work through that with them because out of everything I'd been through, that was the toughest part because I was so used to living in survival mode. I spent, 20 years, pretty much 25 years in chronic stress. It had a massive impact on my health, which has sorted itself out over the last 8 years. But the damage that created to me physically, to me mentally, that I had a lot of healing to do. I had a lot of work to do to be with somebody who loved me so unconditionally and accepted me as I was, accepted my past. When we first got together, I said, "Right, this, you need to know this." And I gave him the whole story in all its ugliness because there was an awful lot of ugly in there. And he said, "Yeah, that's fine. That's your past." He said, "Thing is, I know the woman in here. I know the woman that's buried deep inside you. I met her 20 odd years ago. And that's the woman I'm in love with. And there's still glimmers of her there. That's the woman that I'm going to spend the rest of my life with."
When you started chatting on Facebook, was he married with kids or
No,
anything like
he's
that?
never been married, never had children.
Wow.
And what I didn't realize, and he did actually
Because
say
you
to
were
me one of
worried.
the
You're like,
first
"I don't
things,
wanna kinda mess anything up, whatever
well, that
we
was
have."
it. I didn't know his situation. I didn't know mine. And one of the very first things he said to me, sort of after all that settled down and we sort of went and had a coffee, he said, "Look," he said, "I've spent half of my life looking for you. I want to spend the rest of my life with you."
Deb, my heart.
And that was it. I was done then. It was like, okay, fine. What can I come back to with that? I did turn around to him at that point and say, "You bastard. If you had any idea how long I've been waiting for you to hear those words, I said, how dare you say that to me?" And he just looked at me as if I'd slapped him. And that was it. I was just, yeah, I'm going to spend the rest of my life with you. I've got a completely 100% supportive partner who is my biggest cheerleader. He's still a social worker, which was handy when we were going through court cases with my son because he knew how to deal with it. He'd always looked after children and worked with children and families. So he was really supportive when we were going through all of that. But you know what? It's been a very long time since I've had to be one of his clients. And that is the power of unconditional love. It is the power of working on yourself, of understanding why things happen, why we do the things we do. It's the power of learning your patterns and breaking the patterns that don't work for you and those limiting beliefs. And when I look back, my goodness, it's all come together. It's all come together for a reason. It's why I do what I do now. It's why I'm passionate about it. It's why I'm passionate about healthy relationships because
You've seen the worst of the worst and the best of the best, and
exactly.
everything in between.
Yeah. And you know what? it's actually not that difficult to have a really strong, healthy, and robust relationship. It just takes courage and confidence and belief. And when you can deal with those, and that's what I deal with, then your relationship changes. And I see it time and time again in my clients. You get the self belief, you get the self confidence, get the self worth, and the courage. Oh my word, the relationships that they then have, whether it's an existing relationship that changes
Mm-hmm.
or they go on into new relationships in a contact me and say, I didn't know a relationship could be like this.
Attract.
Oh.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was tough, but my God, it's been worth it.
Deb, I feel like I just watched a movie of like just like your life. Like when I said it earlier, I'm not kidding. You're an actress by trade and by
Mhm,
passion, or
mhm,
you want it to be and can be. And this whole time you've been kind of going through like a trilogy or
mm.
something.
It's
Oh,
been an experience, that's for sure.
like it's been fun watching you tell and listening to you tell the story because you started as this main character going through something. And as you know, as an actress, any movie or book you read, you love to watch the development of the character. And everyone wants a happy ending at the end of the day. And
Mhm.
I feel like we've got a happy ending.
You got one. Yeah, I've got my son, I've got the love of my life, and I've got a career, a coaching practice that I absolutely love.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it doesn't get better than that, does it?
That's what we're all looking for and
Mm,
striving for.
mm. Yet 10 years ago, when I wanted to take my own life, somebody had said to me then what the next sort of 10 years would hold. I would never have believed them. But I'm so glad I didn't succeed.
Yeah, me too. Wow. Deb, this was fantastic. I had to have you on to ask more in-depth questions, but I really just enjoyed sitting here and having you tell the story. You're a great storyteller.
Thank you. I've enjoyed being
Beautiful.
here.
Last but not least, if anyone's interested in learning a bit more about your coaching practices and maybe wants to get your ideas on their current relationship struggles, where do they find you?
Well, the best place to find me is my website, which is www.notarehearsal.co.uk. I've got a Facebook group, Real Women, Real Life, Real Relationships. You can connect with me on Facebook, Deb Morgan. Just look for the red hair. And I'm on all the usual social media as well, either as Not a Rehearsal or Life's Not a Rehearsal. So it'd be great to connect. And anybody that might want some relationship help, I'm in the process of writing a free 30-day program. I
Hmm.
have a 5-day program, which is available for £30 via my website. Again, I think that's about 50, 60 Canadian dollars.
Yeah.
And of course, I have my signature program, Behind the Mask. I do offer a free consultation for anybody who's interested in the Behind the Mask program. That's a 12-week program that I walk my clients through. There's one-to-one coaching in that. There's workbooks, there's videos, there's email support. And that's where they get the full works, hypnotherapy if they need it, timeline therapy. So find me on my website, notarehearsal.co.uk.
Deb, I know you have to run, so I just want to say this has been an absolute pleasure. I need to read your book and please write more books about your story. I know your words are going to resonate with a lot of people, whether or not the things they're going on in the relationships are as drastic as yours. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't, but there's still so much to learn. And I think the overall message that I've gotten from you today is the universe is always working overtime to
Mhm.
give you the things that are meant for you.
Exactly. And just one more thing, Janelle, which I just
Mhm.
remembered. If listeners want to tune into my podcast, The Real
Yes.
Relationship Show, where I interview other people about their relationships because every relationship is different. And
And
I
I
just
love your
want people
mission
to know
behind
that.
that is you want to prove to people that no relationship is normal. And I resonate with that because I'm always talking to my girlfriends. Me and my partner, we do things a little differently. Our relationship looks very different from a lot of my friends. And
Mhm.
I always say, maybe I'm the weird one. And my friends say back to me, they say, if you and him are happy, then there's nothing weird about it. And I'm like, you're right.
Exactly.
And
That's
I
it.
think more
That's
people
it.
need to hear that.
Absolutely.
Well, Deb, thank you again. If you ever want to come back, you are more than welcome.
I would love to. Thank you, Janelle.